with our first virtual fireside chat of the day. It's on digital procurement in the cloud, particularly the challenges and the opportunities for buyers. My guest is Yanchyshyn, General Manager, AWS Marketplace and Partner Engineering at AWS. Hi Matt, good morning.
Good morning, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us and opening the show for us today. We've got an awful lot to pack in, so we will crack in if we can to this. I wanted to break things down, if we could, into the challenges, not that challenge, other challenges for procurement professionals and the opportunities. So let's start with the challenges. Where do you see those?
Yeah, like you said, I work in digital procurement in the cloud, and I think I work with a lot of chief procurement officers, the CPO, and often it reminds me of when I worked with the CISOs in the financial services industry a few years ago when they were also embracing the cloud. The CISO and in some cases the CIO, when it came to cloud migrations, was often seen as the blocker. In fact, one of my CIO friends at a big financial services institution just down the road here said that their office was called the Office of No. And when I think of the role of the CPO and the evolution of procurement in the cloud, fast forward to today, and sometimes the CPO is seen as the blocker. And in fact, what we see as an opportunity is to sort of change that role, to change the role of the CPO to be actually an enabler and one of the chief champions of cloud. But we're still, when it comes to enterprise procurement motions for cloud software and data and marketplaces specifically, we're still at the early to middle stages. And so, I think changing that perception is probably the biggest philosophical challenge as more and more, certainly enterprises with more mature procurement motions, want to adopt startup-like practices, but in an enterprise environment where they've been doing things a certain way for a long time. And things like subscription-based software or just procuring at the type of scale that developers operate at these days in any large enterprise, that's new. So it's hard to get transparency, it's hard to move quickly, it's hard to get all the approvals that your risk teams and your security teams and your procurement teams have relied on for all these years to make sure that the right governance is in place.
Because that's where I wanted to take things next, really, the way CIOs can want tech to innovate, really. Can that contradict the more traditional or the legacy procurement systems?
Absolutely. Well, it doesn't contradict the legacy systems. I think we can extend some of those legacy motions and modernize them for modern software usage, like SaaS, for example, in the cloud. Like I said, I think the CPO and procurement teams in some of the more forward-looking enterprises who I work with have become the chief cloud enablers, and this is because they've been able to actually reduce risk by improving visibility for things like software management. In any enterprise, for example, if you're using, in the old days, shrink-wrapped software, or if you have shadow teams kind of doing their IT things, it's incredibly hard to maintain visibility over all the licenses in use, all the software in use, whether that software is up to date. And those responsibilities are sort of distributed across CPOs, CIOs, CISOs. And through procurement, actually, we have an opportunity to bring those things together. If you procure, for example, your software, your data, or even your professional services now through centralized marketplaces, you have these single panes of glass where you can monitor all the things that you've procured and therefore evaluate your risk posture, evaluate your security posture, look for cost savings and vendor optimization by reducing the number of vendors or consolidating licenses. So I think we're kind of flipping it on its head, and actually at scale, we have an opportunity to improve upon some of those legacy challenges that, quite frankly, we've always had. I mean, software sprawl, license sprawl, most people watching this today will be very familiar with those challenges. And actually, I think migration to the cloud and embracing cloud marketplaces in particular makes some of those challenges easier.
From your perspective, though, when having your conversations with CPOs, is progress being made here? And is it a progress being made fast enough from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, AWS Marketplace, for example, and that's my background and the team that I lead, that's been around for about 10 or 11 years now. And especially in the last 5 years, as we've seen more enterprise adoption of the cloud in general, I think that we've seen an enormous amount of progress. For example, it used to be that you had to negotiate, bring the legal teams in as a lot of companies for the software that we all use made that transition to subscription-based software and SaaS-based software over the last 5 to 10 years.
we still had to negotiate these contracts for these SaaS subscriptions across a huge number of vendors. And where I've seen a lot of progress in the last few years is, for example, standardized terms or standardized EULAs, contract terms, so that the legal teams don't need to be pulled in every time. We all love our lawyers, we love our legal teams, but if you need to bring them in for every single contract negotiation, that can add months, sometimes at the very minimum weeks, to every single contract negotiation. And then every time you renew and you revisit your, for example, your private pricing agreement or your enterprise discount plan, you need to re-engage. So normalized or standardized contract terms have come a long way and have reduced, at least in the procurement cycle, the legal time. Where I'm seeing more recent improvements is in the risk area of procurement. And similarly, every time you onboard a new piece of software or there's response to an incident or something like that, you'd have to involve your security teams, sometimes your governance, risk, and compliance teams, and that would also add a lot of time. And what I'm starting to see now is more sort of risk management as a service capabilities come out in cloud marketplaces. In AWS Marketplace, our version of that is vendor insights, but the ability to actually evaluate the financial posture of the company that builds the software or data sets that you're procuring, whether that is actually architected correctly and meets, for example, your digital sovereignty needs. These types of things, like understanding how a software that is hosted with another or run by another company is architected and whether it meets your compliance requirements, getting visibility into that and be able to essentially audit that self-service, that's progress, and that's definitely something that we've only seen in the last few years. And again, it sort of pushes procurement firmly into the world of modern IT and risk management. But for me, that's huge positive progress. Is bringing the CISO teams, the CPO teams, the GRC teams together, and ultimately enabling the developers and other teams within companies to procure and use software and data faster. So yeah, a ton of progress over the last 5 to 10 years.
Because when you pop the hood of digital procurement in the cloud, the potential is huge and growing constantly. Is it a challenge to get people to understand the potential and realize that potential within their organization?
Yeah, I think especially in enterprise, people see digital procurement and even more specifically cloud marketplaces. I often see them seeing it still through sort of a self-service lens. I think most of us are used to procuring applications for our iPhone, for example, on the App Store. That's a very normal motion, something that wasn't normal a decade ago. We're less used to going through something similar, some type of a self-service motion or using a marketplace for procuring enterprise services or enterprise software, or enterprise data. And so, there's still a bit of a learning curve, I think, for a lot of teams. When they think marketplace, cloud marketplace, or any type of services marketplace, they immediately think, self-service B2C, not something, more enterprise suited B2B. And so I think one of the really awareness gaps that we have is your private pricing negotiations, your private offers that any mature procurement team would rely on, where you're, eking out those discounts and where you take advantage of your channel partners, for example, to do indirect sales. That's all possible with cloud marketplace, and that I think is an education that we need to still do in the industry. Yes, you can preserve your existing relationship with your channel partners. You can still procure through them. You can use your distributors if that's the motion that you use to procure software, for example. Yes, you can still have private contracts that you negotiate. In fact, most of the revenue that flows through AWS Marketplace happens through private offers. And yes, you can still take advantage of negotiated discounts and renewals and long-term contracts. So all of these things that are B2B motions that we're used to in the procurement space, yes, there's education, I think, that still needs to be done in the industry, that those be preserved and in many cases enhanced when you start procuring through a cloud marketplace.
Let's push on to some more opportunities. We've been exploring a lot of challenges, and you touched on it briefly at the start about the CPO having the opportunity to be the chief cloud enabler, which is also another good job title. I think most people will be happy with that. Have you seen examples in your day-to-day work with the organisations you work with and the execs you come into contact with of CPOs really taking that role on and embracing the cloud?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, especially these days, we all want to save money. And certainly the procurement offices and the CPO want to be part of that story. You want to be part of the cost savings initiative of your company, especially these days. And so, I'm seeing a lot of success there. When you consolidate all of the vendors you're using and then consolidate all the software that you're using from those vendors, it's incredible, actually, some of the cost savings that you can realize. And you can only do that if you can centralize to some degree, or in some cases completely, all of those things in one place. So, when you leverage a cloud marketplace, you can get centralized visibility into all of the licenses, distributing those licenses, what vendors are in use, how much they're being used, and then, negotiate. It's amazing in huge enterprises what you find, these pockets of different teams all across the globe who all have, the same software that they've negotiated 10 or 20 different contracts with that one vendor, all at a rate that could be much, much lower if that was a single consolidated global agreement, for example. So you could just imagine the cost savings in that alone. I think efficiencies in people and time, too, is another huge thing. We often express cost savings in terms of license costs, like I just did, or subscription and contract costs. But our biggest cost for many of us, myself included, is people. In my case, it's the engineers who build AWS Marketplace. And the less time that these engineers spend getting approvals for and procuring the software that they use to do their job, and the data they use and whatever else they use, the more time they can spend on building features that ultimately generate revenue for our, from our customers and for our business. So, for me, actually, I think the biggest opportunity for the CPO is, yes, reducing risk, yes, reducing cost, but actually unlocking agility, or unlocking sort of speed of delivery by reducing the time and effort it takes to get the software you need. And it's amazing how much this can free up cycles on dev teams. I can speak personally that the time that we have reduced by using centralized repositories of standardized pre-approved software has allowed me to operate leaner, to build more things with smaller teams who can remain more focused on what they have to deliver. So yeah, time savings, risk savings, by giving you an easier way to get an overall risk profile and posture across your enterprise, and of course, the cost savings that come with any sort of consolidated, mature enterprise procurement negotiation at a global scale.
Because Matt, is it partly a change of mindset of accepting that change is good, even if it's something that you've done for a long time and it's worked and it does what it needs to do? It's being able to embrace that change.
Yeah, it's embracing change. But despite working at Amazon, at AWS, and despite working in cloud marketplaces, I've been here for 11 years actually, and I embrace change, but I don't think you need to give up what was in the past. So first of all, of course, change isn't bad. We heard many of the same objections that are very similar to the ones we hear about enterprise procurement when we started migrating to the cloud, about 10, 15 years ago. Similarly, like I said, when we moved from that more traditional software-based motion to subscription-based software and SaaS. And now we're seeing it in how we do contracts and marketplace procurement and enabling self-service. It's kind of scary to imagine a world where your developer can, through self-service on some type of a private cloud marketplace, procure software without ever talking to anybody and start using it. That can make people nervous. But once you realize that you can do that with the right governance in place, and that actually can improve, because they're not going to use shadow IT anymore. They're going to use your approved channels, use your curated catalog in your private marketplace with your negotiated contracts with those vendors. Suddenly, like, the light bulb goes off and people are like, oh my God, change is not bad. I'm actually preserving the controls that I had in place. I'm actually making it easier for my auditors to verify that I'm meeting my compliance or regulatory obligations. I'm, saving money so the CFO is happy. Suddenly this change doesn't seem so bad. And not only that, but the tools that I'm using every day, maybe my ITSM, like maybe I'm a ServiceNow user, maybe I'm a Salesforce user. All of these tools have plugins for these cloud marketplaces. So you don't have to change the software you're using or the processes you're using either. So, I'm answering your question in two ways, I guess. Yes, of course, change is not bad. I think this is a natural evolution of how we build anything at large companies and how we procure the things that we need to build. But we also don't need to change as much as maybe we think we do. We can preserve those tools, preserve those processes, and simply modernize them through all of the different features of these cloud marketplaces. There's takeaways or kind of what to look ahead to. I really briefly touched on risk reduction. Cost is something I think we all understand in the procurement space, and cost efficiencies, procurement at scale, negotiating licenses. And I think we understand, we're focused a lot on time savings, on efficient processes. What is really, for me, an emerging important space in the procurement as it relates to cloud marketplaces is risk management. And I'm seeing this. We're responding, for example, with AWS Marketplace with features like vendor insights. And it's effectively risk management as a service. And this is sort of the new frontier for me. Like, yes, we can have standardized terms so the lawyers don't have to spend as much time redlining. Yes, we can reduce costs. But what if we could also get all of those SaaS vendors to effectively provide proof that they're architected in such a way that you can meet your digital sovereignty requirements in Germany, if you're selling there, for example, or if you're selling into the government space, that there's FedRAMP compliance or SOC 2, all these acronyms and compliance regimes and regulatory needs that send shivers down some procurement officer's spine. But again, that can be challenges that we can actually overcome through cloud marketplace procurement. For me, this is the next big thing. What if we could filter all procurement by vendors who can provide self-service automated proof
be ready to
that they're meeting those obligations? Oh, your audio just came back.
Can you hear me, Matt? Can you hear me now?
I hear you.
Fantastic stuff. Yes, exactly. That's what I was looking at next about the future. In terms of challenges in the future, what would you say those would be? Are there anything that we need to be wary of?
I think in terms of what we have to be wary of, in any of these situations, shadow IT and shadow procurement, doesn't go away. This is why it's so important that together we educate not only the procurement community, but also users on the benefits of some of these centralized systems. Any company these days wants to operate like a startup while preserving their enterprise values and operating model and processes. And the danger in operating like a startup is that you're hiring all these amazing developers and other roles who want to sort of be agile. And for them, sometimes agility means do whatever I want. And it's really important that we educate them that you can still be agile, you can still move quickly, and still follow these centralized procurement processes. And to me, that's so important, finding that right balance in your enterprise. Every enterprise has different governance requirements, different security requirements, but every enterprise also wants to move as fast as the startups that are trying to eat their lunch. And so I think not only the CPO, but the CIO and CISO who I talk to, the first thing we try to do is work out a model to not ignore that risk, that there's still always going to be that desire to kind of introduce chaos through in the name of agility. And I think together, advertising that you can have agility, preserve developer choice through things like well-built private marketplace will actually allow you to reduce shadow IT. If you don't offer some type of a self-service option for software, data, and professional services procurement, then that shadow IT is going to continue to exist. You can't just ignore it. You have to address this head on. And that gets back to your earlier point and question about change. This is the time to embrace the change, because the developers, whether it's generative AI, developers, all the new trends, the kind of people you need in your company to successfully build the systems to power modern businesses are not going to tolerate being slow, and they're not going to tolerate not being agile. And so you have to acknowledge that and then address it by embracing some of the change, which includes but not limited to cloud marketplaces. And again, that doesn't mean giving up the governance and security and cost savings that you need.
Matt, thank you ever so much indeed. Really enjoyed your company today. Apologies for the slight technical hitch there, but thank you. Thank you for joining us here at Procurement and Supply Chain New York.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a great day.
Thank you very much indeed.